Solved, the political discussion show for people with attention spans and those looking to develop one. My name is Jay, and our other resident solvers are Amanda, Deon, and Erin, who will offer a greeting now.
Hey there.
Hello.
How's it going?
Collectively, we produce the venerable, indispensable, not to mention award-winning podcast Best of the Left, where humans, that's us, curate progressive media on a chosen topic, creating episodes that are greater than the sum of their parts. On this show, we use those same curation skills to pull together stories and ideas that help us solve some of society's biggest problems. Because if we don't tell you how to think, someone dumber on the internet will. Today, we're looking at the benefits of giving as much personally identifying information as possible to both governmental and corporate entities for the sake of helping to build an authoritarian society. We'll look at how disconnected databases, such as for health records, create unnecessary privacy hurdles for governments seeking to root out undesirables, in addition to reducing wholesome, good old-fashioned discrimination. And we'll discuss how demands for privacy-preserving methods of identity and age verification online hurts the economy by preventing the sale of hacked data and precludes the possibility of coercive intimidation tactics by governments that might at least want the option to do that sort of thing, which only seems fair. Everyone ready?
Woohoo!
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like a few people are like, am I on the wrong show? I think this is the wrong show.
And a few people are like, this is my show.
Right, this is my show.
Well, I was going to
Shit.
say, knowing Jay, longtime listeners will definitely hear the sarcasm in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the danger, though.
Mhm.
Sarcasm's no longer allowed on the internet.
No,
Actually,
it's
speaking
extremely
of which,
dangerous thing.
yes. Speaking of which, we just did a episode on the dark triad of personality traits that includes Machiavellianism, which
Best of the
reminded me.
Left episode.
Sorry, thank you. An episode of Best of the Left available wherever you get your podcasts. And that reminded me that I learned just in the past few months that there is a very strong argument for Machiavelli, who wrote The Prince, which is it's the classic instruction manual for how to be Machiavellian in your ruthless pursuit of power. That might have been, like, if not satire, not really what that dude believed, because he wrote a bunch of other stuff that was very pro-republic, pro-democracy, power to the people sort of stuff. And it might be the biggest instance of the Amanda principle we've ever come across, which of course is the idea that anything taken out of context can be sort of claimed by any side of a political debate and said that this proves my point entirely. And that's the danger of satire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why in the image for that Best of the Left episode, there's a little asterisk next to Machiavellian because maybe
Yeah.
it wasn't his intention.
Easter egg.
Mhm.
Yeah. So starting with the beneficial sharing of data for the sake of authoritarianism, we look to the New York Times with the headline, "States have more data about you than the feds do. Trump wants to see it." And honestly, the headline basically tells you all you need to know. The states have more data, and until recently, everyone was in favor of keeping it that way, because tyranny. But now there is a pro-tyranny party, and they have made an about face on data sharing and are super excited about it. And so it says, quote, "The White House signaled its data centralizing effort in a March executive order calling for federal agencies to share information that has long been guarded in separate data sets. Notably, the order also sought, quote, unfettered access to comprehensive data from all state programs that receive federal funding," end quote, programs like Medicaid and food stamps. So I guess the good news is they're only targeting the poor and vulnerable, or maybe just primarily targeting the poor and vulnerable.
I'm going to have a tough time with the sarcasm throughout the show.
Oh, sorry. I'm looking for silver linings.
Uh-huh.
And of course, the other element of Trumpism is that the excuses are constantly shifting. And it says, quote, "Critics today note that the Trump administration across both terms has sought widespread personal data, but that the reasons for needing it have shifted, encompassing election integrity, legislative redistricting, waste, fraud and abuse, and now immigration enforcement. That suggests the administration sees value in having that data well beyond any single use of it," end quote. Feels like the understatement of the day, at least. Yeah, it does sort of like look that way, doesn't it? They might
Mm,
want to use your data for more than the reasons they said that one time.
I feel like there's a disconnect because, like, Democrats and Republicans, I feel like should be on the same page with this. It is the conspiracy theories that have been
mhm.
on the right wing politic radar, at least, like Big Brother looking after you, having all this data. But it kind of reminds me of the fascist that debated Mehdi Hassan when he was like, "Oh, but like it won't be me. I won't be part of that group." And like that's kind of how this is reading. It might not be setting off the alarm bells for a certain population, but knowing what we do about who comprises most benefits and like actually is on SNAP and Medicaid, it is heavily Republicans. There are going to be a lot of Republicans that are brought into this like data collection, if you will. And like it's benevolent leader, so it's okay. Like he's not going to do anything with that data that's going to impact me.
I would also assume that they don't know. They are in a hermetically sealed information bubble that unless they accidentally clicked on this because of Jay's intro and are now like a few minutes in thinking, wait, they're on the left. But they're never going to hear this information. We all know that Elon Musk took a bunch of 20-somethings into the federal government and took all of the federal government's data. We know that. Do they know that? Do they know that that is exactly what happened? Or do they just think Big Balls is cool and Big Balls is a hero now that he got beat up by teenagers in DC that started a military occupation of the Capitol? I just, this information war, it's multiple fronts. And part of it, they already won. They have a group of people who will only ever hear what they want. And that is terrifying.
Add a little nuance to it. I think they know, but how it's being brought to them, I guess, is where the distortion happens. Like it is definitely in a immigration enforcement way or just completely obscured.
Like, this is what you have to give up in order to fix immigration,
Yeah.
right? Sacrifice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of like while reading this several times post 9/11 came to mind. And this is kind of like the in order to be safe, we have to now do all these protocols at the airport. We
Absolutely.
have to give
Yep.
this data. We have to have biometric data. So I definitely think it's the framing in which they're not comprehending what that means. They're not actually identifying that their information is being held and how it could be utilized.
Yeah. And on our last show, actually, when unfortunately, Erin, you weren't there, but we kind of entered into that area a bit saying citizens gave up their freedom to quote unquote be safe. And so we've been giving up and giving up and giving up. And this is just another layer of that. And of course, we're losing much more than I'm sure most people ever thought, but we're willingly doing it basically. When it comes to something like data, there's not like an outcry in the same way that it is if your civil rights are being violated, because it's more, intangible. Like you can't see it so obviously.
Oh, and it's a joke, right? Everybody has the secret, is it FBI agent or CIA agent on their phone? And like people will like make a joke about talking to, oh, I was just joking about that. So
Mhm.
it's even acknowledged, but kind of belittled in the humor sense.
Yeah, accepted.
I had something clarified for me today. I read an article about an absurd dust up on the internet. The article was sort of using it as an example of how this sort of stuff works. For context, there's this, what is obviously an ongoing propaganda war about how in hyperpolarization, people use the shortcuts of if my team is for it, then I'm for it. And if the other team is for it, then I'm against it. So that's one shortcut. Donald Trump also introduced shortcuts like if it's an attack on me, then it's a witch hunt by definition, right? But there's another element of it, which is it's not a direct attack on Donald Trump, but it's a concern that the left has. The way to knock the wind out of any kind of sales like that is to really hype up anything that the right can even suggest that the left is upset about that is demonstrably absurd, because then it makes the left concerns sound absurd, or it can go into a category of, well, the left is concerned about absurd things. So if they're concerned about something, then I know I should dismiss it. So the
Mhm.
thing I read an article about was that sororities are doing dance videos to promote their sororities. And so it's like attractive college girls dancing. And so conservatives are reposting those videos with the tagline, like, liberals are being driven crazy by how much they hate
Mhm.
this. And so the journalist was like, that seems weird. Is that really true? And they went and looked, and they're like, I literally couldn't find anyone on social media expressing outrage about these types of videos. And so I contacted one of the people who reposted it, saying that the left is outraged, and asked, do you have examples of people on the left being outraged about these videos? And they're like, no, but I just am very confident that they are outraged.
Mhm.
And so, because that's obviously absurd, anyone on the right who gets, interested in that topic sees it, and they're like, "Oh, well, another one for the left." I mean, we haven't gotten into the whole Sydney Sweeney thing that took over the internet for a week and a half or whatever. But,
Mhm.
like, their whole talking point is the left doesn't like conventionally attractive women. It's absurd propaganda to the nth degree, but that's their talking point, and so they, like, throw in these dance videos as another example. And so when the left says, "Hey, by the way, the government is stealing your data and very bad things will happen because of it," they're like, "But the left doesn't make any sense ever about the things they're upset about, so I'll ignore it."
Yeah, actually, on that point, I think that the left sort of joining in the fervor about releasing the Epstein files is not really helping the case, because I think people on the right see that and then they're like, "Oh, well, never mind. Like, I guess I'm not as worked up about that as I was." Like, there is definitely some of that happening to some degree.
This is all. Not to get too deep into that Sydney Sweeney bit, but the Chris Cuomo calling out AOC for a
For an
video that
AI
was
video.
ab- absurdly over the top AI, obviously AI, about the Sydney Sweeney thing. And his defense was, yeah, but it sounds like something you would say. And that is exactly that tactic in practice. Well, I mean, obviously AOC's crazy, so she would get on the House floor and start cursing about Sydney Sweeney. That's a journalist, in theory, quote
Uh,
unquote journalist, Chris Cuomo. So
barely.
the
Yeah.
average person who isn't on a platform called News Nation will have no idea what real information is about what AOC believes about almost anything. The framing part of it is important, but there is just also that the well is poisoned. Like you said, like the Epstein thing. I agree with you 100%, Amanda. Like the left caring about the Epstein files has benefited Trump in enormous ways. Now we
Yep.
can just like, wow, it's a witch hunt. Just like that first, I think that was the first thing or the second thing you said, Jay. So how we get information about your information being stolen is, I mean, where do we even begin to bridge the gap here? Because it does seem like we are living functionally in separate realities.
Well, the only thing that works is the line that this New York Times ends with. This is where we begin, fear mongering of our own. It says, if Republican states don't also defend their role in that system, a future Democratic administration might want all this data and power too. That's it.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that might scare those people. However, the other way it pushes people is like, oh, right, we'd better really support all those
Yeah.
anti-democratic policies to ensure
Make
that
sure.
Democrats are never able to win power again, because
Yeah.
they're so evil, they might misuse that power against me.
So, what I'm hearing you say is that the strategy for the Epstein list should be emphasizing Democrats on the list and us wanting to know who in the party participated.
That's the thing
Yeah, we
well,
have.
yeah, we could go on a whole. We should probably have this conversation sometime because
Yeah.
I think it would be interesting. Yeah.
Not to go too far off on the tangent, but Gavin Newsom just started his campaign for 2028 presidency by saying he's going to do the thing that Texas is going to do with gerrymandering by being like Trump. He's putting tweets out that I see on Blue Sky because I'm not on Twitter, but that are in all caps, and he's finishing them with "Thank you for your attention to this matter." Yeah, that doesn't seem like the right tactic either. Honestly, that seems terrifying. Like you just want to be the
he's trying to troll
left-coded?
him.
Yeah, he's trolling, but is he though? Like that's the thing about people that go that deep into it. Are you trolling, or are you kind of actually like that?
Well, that's the problem. We live in this world where like you can't do satire because you're basically, if you do satire, like there's no way to not just be the thing that you're trying to satire. It's, I'm not Gavin Newsom's not my favorite person, but yeah, it's what do you do? What do you do?
And Deon, just for clarification, are you separating out the policy of gerrymandering in blue states from Newsom's tactics and style?
Yes, for sure. Because as far as, the gerrymandering goes, Democrats consistently, regularly win more votes in the House every single election cycle and have less seats. So as far as balance, that's a tactic, sure. I think I just hate Gavin Newsom. Like, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I think that's fair.
There we go.
But I honestly think his campaign ended before it started, going on right-wing talking points and bashing trans people. Like, that's not a good start for your introduction. I may be wrong. It may come back to bite me in the butt, but I think the longer he's out in public, the worse it's going to get. And yeah, I don't think he'll pull well.
We'll see. But I think the most acceptably hated group in America are trans people at the moment. So I don't think that'll be a problem for him.
We'll come back to this clip.
Good silver lining.
On the idea that the right might be even somewhat scared of the left coming in and doing these same things. I mean, in a neoliberal structure, which is what we live in, that has been happening, right? Like Obama didn't come in and roll back the Patriot Act. They continued on. They, just amass whatever the last administration did and continue on and keep going. And there are rarely times where the other side comes in and says, well, we're not going to do that anymore. If it's about surveillance, every administration, no matter what side, has been pro-surveillance. That's been a very unifying thing. And so I feel like data collection is sort of the same thing. Like, while yes, principally the left and candidates who say they're on the left should be adamantly fighting against this, what have they done to help enforce consumer privacy laws? Maybe like 20 states have privacy laws, maybe 22, but they're all varying in their degree and what they protect people from. And when it comes to government data, that's different. Like those laws are protecting you from commercial entities absorbing your data. What do we do when the actual federal government wants our data? Do we as people have rights? Because what the administration is asking for right now, legally, they are not entitled to. That is not part of the agreement with the states and the federal government. They're not entitled to that information. The federal government and states work together on certain programs and can share some data within those programs. But what is being asked for, which includes voter rolls at this point, that's not part of the system. And so as I was reading these articles, I'm like, do I get a say? Like, they're talking about it like, this is between the states and the federal government. Well, it's my fucking data. Do I get any say in this? And right now, the answer is no.
And so now, with the consistent trend of them always having more than one reason to access your data, we come to this Time magazine article. Trump announces plan to launch private health tracking system with big tech firms. And it says, quote, The Trump administration announced a new initiative on Wednesday designed to allow Americans to share their medical records across a host of apps and programs managed by private tech companies, a move that proponents say will facilitate easier access to those records across the country's fragmented healthcare system, but that digital privacy experts fear will risk making patients' data less secure, end quote. And I just have to play this because it reminds me so clearly of one of my favorite video segments from The Onion going way back to like the end of the aughts, I think.
Congress today reauthorized funding for Facebook, the massive online surveillance program run by the CIA. According to Department of Homeland Security reports, Facebook has replaced almost every other CIA information gathering program since it was launched in 2004.
After years of secretly monitoring the public, we were astounded so many people would willingly publicize where they live, their religious and political views, an alphabetized list of all their friends' personal email addresses, phone numbers, hundreds of photos of themselves, and even status updates about what they were doing moment to moment. It is truly a dream come true for the CIA.
Much of the credit belongs to CIA agent Mark Zuckerberg, who runs the day-to-day Facebook operation for the agency. The decorated agent, codenamed the Overlord, was recently awarded the prestigious Medal of Intelligence Commendation for his work with the Facebook program, which he has called, quote, the single most powerful tool for population control ever created.
Yeah.
So, because the emphasis on this healthcare sharing thing is, oh, it's all voluntary. There's no central federally run database. Trump made sure to point that out. Like, hey, people are really concerned about that. You don't want the federal government having a centralized database of all your data, and it's all voluntary. So if you don't want to add to it, you don't have to. It's like, right. But as evidenced by Facebook, people will give away a lot more data voluntarily than they probably should because they don't understand the costs as easily as they understand the benefits. Because obviously a system like that will have some benefits. That's the pitch, right? It's, oh, it'll make it easier to transfer your data between doctors or between states or between health insurance companies. And imagine the paperwork you wouldn't have to do. But because private companies are involved and the data sharing is voluntary, the biggest concern is about circumventing HIPAA, which I finally learned what that acronym is actually for. It says, quote, the announcement prompted immediate pushback from digital privacy experts who warned of the dangers of sharing health data with companies that aren't covered by the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or HIPAA, the federal law that protects personal health information from being shared by certain entities such as medical providers and insurers without a person's consent, end quote. I think the accountability part of that law is exactly what they were most focused on figuring out how to avoid and circumvent. If you give away your data voluntarily, they can do whatever they want with it according to their own microscopic type that you will click through in their terms of service without reading. That'll be the next phase of health information instead of what we have today, which is sort of like people know HIPAA as shorthand. They know it as like, when I talk to a doctor, I know they're not allowed to share my information with anyone, because even if you don't understand how the law works, you kind of know it's there. And this is trying to open the gateway to a totally different status quo.
I have a callback to a show we did maybe a year or two ago about the vacuum cleaners that were mapping your home and like selling that data. And like part of how they get people to agree is if you don't have full access to all the functionality of whatever you've spent now $500, $600 on, maybe
Right.
more. So that's what I thought when the emphasis is on wearables, that like they will
Yeah.
get you to agree to sharing your data because in order to utilize the device, you're going to have to share your data. Now, of course, we don't know the finer details. It might not end up like that, but it's hard for me to believe that we're not going to. Yes, Deon's face is saying what we're all thinking, which is it's hard to believe that they're not going to prioritize corporate profits and corporate motives instead of actual citizens.
Yeah. And we talked about CPAPs too. That was another example where if you use your CPAP machine, you can only use it if you're willing to have all the data from your machine sent to the company.
I don't think we have to give any of them the benefit of the doubt ever again. I think they've proven time and time again that if it's the most evil option, they're going to do that, because I think part of that's fun. Like, naming your company Palantir. Like, that's just saying you're the bad guys. Like, this is part of their kink, is not just taking the data and making as much money as possible, but also just being dicks about it. So
Hmm.
assume the worst.
Yeah. Actually, on that point, you're right. Whatever very fine veneer was on the tech world before has completely come off.
Gone.
Like it is
Gone.
absolutely gone. If you see the CEO of Palantir talk, it's supervillain diabolical comic book shit. I mean, like,
Yeah, evil
does not care.
Taika Waititi.
Yeah, right. They do look a little like, don't they? There's no more pretending. So at this point, if you're not expecting it, you're not paying attention because they're basically saying it out loud what they intend to do.
Yeah, they are, or are like somewhat skillfully obfuscating what they're going to do with it. Like I said, Trump really emphasized there's not going to be a centralized federal database. And if that's where your thinking stops, you're like, okay, great. I guess they care about privacy. So this article says, in what circumstances, if any, the government would be able to access patients' health data through this initiative? And if so, how they may or may not use that information? This is a question people have. So Trump said, there's not going to be a federal database. Great. But these corporations will have all of your data. And we already know that Trump's administration likes to say, if program X gets federal funding, then we get all the data. That he already said it about the states. If the states are running a program and the federal government provides any funding for it, we get all your data. So we don't need a centralized federal database. At least that's not how it needs to start. It can start as private, independent databases that will receive federal funding, and that will be used as leverage to demand federal access to that data.
And I think the other thing, and we've talked about this before, not having the imagination to think of how they can use these things in evil ways. I think there definitely is a acceptance of, well, everyone's got all this information on me anyway, whatever. Like at this point, who cares, right? But it, especially when it comes to your health data, like it really, it can really fuck up your life.
Yeah, I mean, just like one example, still from this article, is about reproductive health data in particular, being particularly sensitive post-Roe. And they note that corporations tend to collect location data whenever possible. So if you or someone you know crosses state lines to get an abortion, they'll know. And that is definitely information this federal government administration would be interested in, just as one tiny example.
I think Amanda's right though, like the lack of imagination and also like believing that what they're going to do with the data is exactly what they're saying they're going to do with the data and not thinking ahead of, okay, well, now that they have that data and that capability, what else can we do with it? I think of, insurance companies denying claims because of certain health data getting out, or I mean, there's just always something more that can evolve once the information has already been released, if you will.
Yeah, and they're not going to claw it back. I had this thought and then forgot to say it, Amanda, when you were talking about how administrations, when it comes to data collection and surveillance, tend to sort of scratch each other's backs, and Democrats might rail against invasive practices, but then not undo it when they
Yeah.
come to power. And I had that thought about, so say the Trump administration continues on, they massively centralize lots of data, which we've talked about in previous episodes. This is a debate we had before. It was decided that for the sake of freedom, we should not have centralized databases of citizens' information. The Trump administration is going to break that decades old system, centralize everything. How do you then undo that? Are the Democrats going to use the political capital necessary to break apart a centralized system decentralize it, there will be cries of the Democrats are going to spend a lot of time and money to make things less efficient and less convenient for you. Are they really going to take the time and effort? Are they going to have the information campaign to explain to people why it's critical for the sake of democracy and individual privacy and freedom that they do that? I absolutely don't trust that they would
Yeah.
do that. Like, they might want to, they might wish it, "Oh, I wish it was still the way it used to be, but it isn't, and so anyway, we'll just be better stewards of it and not misuse the data, but we're not gonna go through the effort of breaking it up." That's
Yeah.
absolutely what they'll do.
Yeah. And if we get the chance to, I mean, we're going to have to rebuild the government, basically. That should be, in a reasonable world, like part of it, right? And it shouldn't just be let's go back to the way things are, but let's do it in a way that actually takes people's privacy into consideration and still operates effectively. But yeah, will we get the chance to do that big overhaul? God, I hope so.
We may not get to. Someone will. This will break. This is not sustainable. Like this doesn't work long term. It might work for the rest of our lifetimes, who knows, but it's not a way that human beings want to live, with a centralized authority that knows everything about them at all times. On a little aside, a little tangent, there's a kind of a theme of YouTube videos where people go and look at super expensive homes and critique and joke about them. Ryan George, who's on YouTube, the pitch meetings guy, he does a funny little series about it. All those homes, like the new rich homes, have this kind of just vacant, empty hollowness about them that I think really symbolizes the people that have these homes. I think we need to start normalizing talking about what this billionaire class that wants to own and control everything really is fundamentally. They're just kind of scared. Number one, they're isolated. They move away from everyone. Their homes are these not homes. They look like hotels that people don't live in. They're not living normal human lives, so they don't connect to us. They see us only as data at this point, only as obstacles, only as something to control and keep away from them. So, as long as those people are in charge, this is going to continue. And I think, if talking about bridging the divide, that's a divide that I think can be bridged. Republicans, they may think some of the billionaires are on their side right now, but eventually, working class people will have to realize, of all political stripes, that there is a source to all this problem. And it is a few very rich, very, I think, mentally ill people.
Oh, definitely.
And we need to claw back some control from them, / make them not exist as a class of people.
But Deon, what do you want them to do? Build palatial hotel homes or take over neighborhoods like Mark Zuckerberg? Like, damned if you do, damned if you don't. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
God, they don't have a choice.
Well, I was just thinking about, like, how do you judge the value of human life? A lot of people would say things like the number of people who show up to your funeral, the number of friends you have, right? But if you're a billionaire, you don't have any real relationships because you can't, because the money gets in the way. So if you can't have a genuine relationship because you have too much money, then you have to, like, default to a different way to judge the value of your life, which is how much money you can accumulate. So again, damned if you do, damned if you don't. So the do-gooders over at the ACLU wrote a whole document in 2003 about HIV/AIDS patients and their data being exposed. So we're just using this as an example of what life might be like when you live under constant maybe even only low-level fear that your medical data will be exposed. For these patients, it often just happened the old-fashioned way and definitely illegally. So they're still covered by HIPAA. They get their data exposed. And in their case, it's very often not technical breaches, databases, anything like that. It's literally just people with loose lips. So, really, just to succinctly summarize the problem, hundreds of thousands of diagnosed HIV/AIDS patients were not receiving ongoing care. Think about that for a minute. Ponder the societal health implications of HIV/AIDS patients not receiving care. See how that might go. And then it says, quote, because they are terrified about the potential consequences of a breach of confidentiality, social stigma, rejection by loved ones, being evicted from an apartment, losing a job, and suffering harassment or violence. Because of that fear, more people get infected, more people get sick, and more people die, end quote. And then on top of that, they're estimating hundreds of thousands more are infected and don't even get tested. So they remain undiagnosed for all the same reasons. And the breaches of confidentiality, like I said, it's usually not technical and they're definitely illegal. It just happens through either carelessness or healthcare staffers often have, or at least sometimes have, the misguided opinion that HIV/AIDS patients should be forced to reveal their status to people. And so the healthcare staffers take it upon themselves to reveal their status, to their family members, sometimes just to a waiting room full of other patients. And they will announce sort of loudly that you've been tested positive, that sort of thing. And so that's happening relatively on the small scale, but the ramifications are super obvious and really dangerous to society. And so, what happens when that sort of breach of confidentiality becomes closer to the norm or even the perceived norm? If there is a system in place that people don't trust to be secure, that they get the sense like, oh, yeah, that HIPAA thing, I'd heard about that, but I hear it's being circumvented now. Is my healthcare information not safe? The amount of treatments that will not be pursued, diagnoses that will not be pursued, and the danger to society for any amount of infectious disease will be, let's just say bad. I'll go with bad for that.
One of the things we haven't talked about yet is just the nature of giant companies being hacked constantly now. That's just the norm. That's not like one off like it kind of used to be maybe a decade ago. Account information for 4 giant companies got hacked in this spring, and it was like one of the biggest data breaches that had ever occurred. And that wasn't even the most scary one this year. And so, my health insurance company got hacked a couple of years ago. And I think we're all getting like $150 and slap you on your butt and send you on your way after a big class action lawsuit. Like you're not going to get any real retribution if something like this goes down. And when it's your health records and there aren't federal laws covering your data and there's a hack, like, sorry, it's not going to be the big deal payout that you might imagine. Like, that's not how this works. And I think people think, oh, well, if there was a hack and someone stole my, health information, clearly I would be compensated for, whatever. No, not really. Like, because it would have happened to, I don't know, hundreds of millions of people. No, you're not going to get real compensation. And your health information is out there. So it doesn't even matter what kind of money you get as compensation. Your health information is out there. I'm getting zillions of spam calls constantly this week for some reason. Clearly, my number ended up on some list. Mortgage companies and all sorts of, stupid spam stuff are getting in touch with me. I have no control over finding out how that happened, who has my information. Like, that's the world we live in. So now you're handing incredibly personal stuff. And we're talking stuff that if someone found out, they could totally ruin your life, which is what happened to AIDS patients. They lost housing. They were discriminated from jobs. They were basically shunned and shamed in their communities. The fallout from these things are major. And so you're thinking, oh, I'm fine or whatever. Well, I don't know. Were you treated for drug addiction at any time in your life? Did you have cancer at some point? Did you smoke? All of these things, maybe they won't societally affect you, but absolutely you can run into people in your life where if they come across this information, especially if it's the government, but if there are people in your life who come across it, can make decisions that can totally affect you in a huge, huge way. And so again, we're coming to the having the imagination to think about how this can go down. And, sure, it's illegal to fire someone for a health issue, but you need to be able to prove that they fired you because of a health issue. And then you have to have the means to hire a lawyer to have a court battle about it. How many people actually have those resources? You don't have any power is the headline here.
Not to bring it down from there, because that wasn't really most hopeful, but there's also the aspect of this, just call it what it is, fascist movement, that your health is representative of your morality. If you are unhealthy, it's because you deserve to be unhealthy. If you are sick, it's because you aren't one of the strong ones, one of the good, one of the pure. And if that's the case, and now all these companies have access to this information and now can judge your worthiness based on this health information, how many people are actually going to go actually get checked out? How many people are going to go find out if they actually need treatment? Because, it's a moral failing. It's a weakness. It's something wrong with you. How many people are going to suffer and die because they were too afraid to be vulnerable and ask for help because they needed it? Because this is a society that never really was that forgiving, never really was that helpful to people who needed things. And it's going to be amplified over time. It's going to get worse and worse and worse. And people are going to get judged harsher and more harshly as time goes on, because they have connected it directly. Like, this is the Maha movement in a nutshell. I think it just kind of comes directly from COVID. A lot of people on the, I guess they were, not leftists necessarily, but the crunchies, who really did associate health with what you did personally, your individualistic, your goodness, your, taking care of yourself. This is now a mass scale movement, and it is running our health departments. And that's not going to get better over time if we don't demolish this system.
At what point is RFK going to say, well, if you vaccinated your children, then we're not going to cover Medicaid, Medicare for you?
She's so
going
close
forward.
to that.
I know we're right on the line. Yeah, we're right there.
I really appreciate you clarifying that, Deon. You answered my question before I had a chance to ask it, because I was going to make the comparison with those who say, if you have nothing to hide, then you have nothing to fear. That incredibly illogical, short-sighted go-to logic that people use to dismiss surveillance capitalism and all of that. And I was like, yeah, but how's that going to translate to the medical world? If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, but you don't have control over when you get sick or infected or something, in a way that you may suddenly be very fearful that other people would, become aware of. And you clarified that that's actually a moral failing, and that was the detail that I had forgotten. that obviously it actually is your fault when you get sick. So I retract my question.
Man, we are full of the sarcasm today, aren't we?
Coping mechanism.
Yeah.
Next up, the UK is making the internet safe. All you need to do is upload your ID to a porn site that may or may not keep it in a database. Just kidding. That's not how it actually works. Probably, at least in some cases. The EFF, we're big fans of the Electronic Frontier Foundation around here, wrote the article, "Blocking access to harmful content will not protect children online, no matter how many times UK politicians say so." And they lay out the issue at the beginning. It says, quote, in late July, new rules took effect that require all online services available in the UK to assess whether they host content considered harmful to children. And if so, these services must introduce age checks to prevent children from accessing such content. Online services are also required to change their algorithms and moderation systems to ensure that content defined as harmful, like violent imagery, is not shown to young people. So far, so good. To their credits, question mark, the government has contracted with a variety of age verification methods, some of which appear to be relatively privacy preserving. That's the good news. The problem is that if the privacy preserving methods don't work, and there's a variety of reasons why they might not, you then might be stuck with the super dangerous privacy invading methods like uploading your ID to a database that will then make that database, because of your information and everyone else's information, it'll make that database very attractive to hackers. And so then it is really only a matter of time until it gets hacked. And then that's only if you're lucky enough to have an ID, because it turns out not everyone has an ID. Who would have known?
This made me rethink about that little mini series I think we talked about on the show, Adolescence, the
Yeah.
British little
Mhm.
mini series about, a red pill gone wrong. And now thinking about how Keir Starmer promoted that and wanted everyone in the UK to see it, seems like a backdoor into this new kind of surveillance state, whatever tactic they're trying to do to ostensibly to protect children, which, I mean, let's not undersell that there is a problem. There obviously is an issue with children having access to way too much on the internet, and there does need to be some way to combat it. But this seems like the worst possible way to protect children in exchange for another loss of freedom. There has to be some sort of balance struck where we don't just censor everything that makes us uncomfortable for the children, as opposed to having more adult responsibility, more adult conversations, more you could have more interaction with your children and know what's going on with your children. I think that's when Republicans have talked about the nanny state often for years and years. This is what comes to mind for me. Do you really want the government to just control what you can and cannot see as an adult? I get that kids shouldn't see 95% of the things that are on the internet, but maybe I'm going to be conservative now. Some level of personal responsibility as a parent, as someone who should have some say so or view of what my child is watching, is on me. Now, granted, they're out in the world most of the time. These kids are going to find a way. And then that's where the question comes: how do we keep kids who are not under parental supervision from accessing these things? And is giving the government, or worse, private companies, all this access to your information the right way to do it? I think no.
It also feels like doing something could be good if you, I don't know, consulted with educators or expertise, if you weren't just so
Mhm.
reliant on the tech industry and the ideas that are within reach. It would take a little more effort to look at ways in which what does prevent children from gaining access, or what incentivizes them to stay once they've seen violent or graphic content. We could examine those things. Psychology has been around for how long? We could invest money to study this. We could do education programs for both parents and children. We could do a whole curriculum around it. There are so many things that I can think of, and I'm not an expert, that don't involve just uploading IDs. Because let's be honest, if parents are okay with their children being online, okay, so log into my account and scroll. If that's what you want to do, like, okay, we are making it so much harder for other people to access the information in the name of protecting children. I don't think that this is actually the approach because we're also making some of the information seem more attractive than it actually is just by withholding it.
So, just to clarify, I said up top, there are a variety of methods to confirm your age or identity, or confirm your age without confirming your identity, that are relatively privacy preserving. So, this is not a all or nothing, like there is no good way to do this sort of situation. That said, there was one piece of a video about this. Sky News did a little investigative report. Journalists went around to one or more of these companies providing the age checks, and then also went and talked with one of the UK regulators. And the regulator said something that sent all my red flags up. They talked about this company, Yoti, Yoti. The journalist went to Yoti, had the demonstration of the face scan, had the guy explain why they scan your face and then immediately delete all of that photographic information. They're like, That's part of our contract. We don't keep it. We don't want it. We just want to see if you're an adult." And then we immediately discard that information. Sounds good. Yoti is one of the better options on the table. However, when the regulator was talking about this, they said that one of the ways of accessing a site is to do a simple face scan, which we're all quite familiar with from unlocking our phones.
So in practice, there are a range of technologies that companies can use to put the age checks in place. So examples are things like facial age estimation, which we're all very used to using when we open our phones, for example. Other examples are things.
And they moved on. I was like, holy shit, man, that is not the same thing.
Yeah.
Your phone having that data, your face scan data that is locked on an encrypted, secure chip that never, ever, ever leaves your device is not the same as looking into a camera connected to a private corporation somewhere far away. And so, one of two things: either that regulator does not know the difference, which is incredibly dangerous, which also brings to mind people don't know the difference. Like, people don't know how their technologies work. I've had conversations with people who have been like learning to set up a phone with a fingerprint to unlock the phone, but and then they think, well, my computer already has my fingerprint, so will that automatically work on my phone? No, it doesn't, because it doesn't transfer. Those things don't transfer. They're on device only, but people don't know. And so people's ignorance about the way technology works actually makes them vulnerable to thinking that things are looser than they really are. Like, well, but like Apple already has my fingerprint. No, they don't. Your phone has it and no one can ever access it. That's how that works. And saying like, well, my phone knows what my face looks like. So what's the difference with having an age verification website know what my face looks like? Not the same at all. So, sorry, as I was saying, one of two things: either that regulator doesn't know the difference because they are one of those people who doesn't actually understand the technology, or they're speaking in a way that obfuscates the reality to make it sound less sketchy than it is. For anyone who does know that having your face scanned on your phone is secure, having it implied that having your face scanned by a third party private company through the internet is just the same or just as secure is, I mean, that is bald faced incorrect. So I don't know if they were lying, but there is no good option for why that regulator said what they said. And the fact that they were speaking on behalf of the UK government was not inspiring.
A few years ago, or maybe even longer ago, we were talking about, I believe it started with elevators and how a lot of people don't actually know exactly how an elevator works. They take them every day, there's a trust involved. And for a long time in our world, like people generally knew how things worked, the things that they used the most. But then with elevators and then continuing into pretty serious technology, we don't know anymore. That's the truth. I mean, even if people have a general sense of what an operating system is or like how your phone functions or whatever. You don't really know everything about it and how it works. And I think that with something like this, we've entered a point for sure, and I don't know when it hit, but there is an absolute trust, an unearned trust with these tech companies that we will use them. And there's a suspicion that, yeah, they're probably going to collect some data, but people do it anyway, right? Because it is a black box and it's really hard for them to grasp what they are giving away. For instance, when AI first started on the scene and there was this app going around where you could make AI like LinkedIn pictures of yourself, everyone was using it. And like, I was like, who the hell is this? Who are you giving your photo to? And it turned out the terms of service were pretty sketchy and like they just absorbed a bunch of people's faces because they had bigger plans that you don't know about. Like that's part of it. And I think that while it is somewhat noble for companies like Yoti or, whatever the other options are to say, we're really passionate about making sure that this is secure and we will delete everything the moment we have it and all of those things, you still have to give an incredible amount of trust to a company to give over this information. And even if the company is just absolutely gung ho and they have all the measures in place, that doesn't mean that hacking doesn't exist. None of the technology we have now is hack proof. That's just not the point in time we live in. Maybe someday, I don't know, but right now that is not the case. So, I don't mean to sound like, oh, you should just never use anything because obviously in our world that's not how things are going to go. But you do have to know that every time you interact with a tech company, you are taking a risk. And being at least aware of that is really important. And this whole setup in the UK, I mean, wow, the amount of trust they are asking you for is unearned and incredibly high risk.
Sort of paralleling the HIV/AIDS patients who had the fear of a data breach, trust in the system is almost as important as the security of the system itself. People's perception is hugely important. And if people don't have trust in the system, that is an effective limiting of their access to information and their ability to speak freely on the internet. And the government's stance on this is basically like, well, tough. And that's one of the major concerns. I mean, this is why we started talking about the relationship between information accumulation and authoritarianism, because it's not always that because they have your information, they will actively use it against you. It's that having your information or demanding your information in exchange for what used to be a free speech right creates a chilling effect so that people become afraid. They don't want to say things that they would have said otherwise. They don't want to access sites that they may have accessed otherwise. Obviously, I'm not just talking about porn sites. The UK's law is very broad branching. There are sites that will require age checks. I mean, like Reddit is going to require age checks because if anything could be sensitive to children, then that's enough for a corporation to want to be better safe than sorry. And so there's going to be huge swaths of the internet barred to people who do not willingly take part in these age verification checks, which, as I've been saying, covers a range of privacy protecting versus incredibly not at all privacy protecting. And the inevitable limits on speech and access to information is something that is either not really being considered or is being dismissed as an acceptable trade-off for the sake of protecting children. And the problem that is described multiple times by experts who are interviewed on this is there are better ways to do this. And the ways that are being pursued are, like, by and large, the majority of them are dangerous, risky, privacy invasive, And there are better ways. We could take different routes, but there are going to be downsides to everything. And the trade offs are not good right now.
I think just to say them out loud, just as an example, one of the alternatives is like using a token, right?
Yeah. I mean, so I had the thought, like, I was reading through all of these and I got thinking about on device verifications. So you can prove your identity to your own personal device. And then, so imagine how Apple Pay or Google Pay works. Apple Pay, I'm more familiar with, but I assume Google Pay is very similar, that your bank details are confirmed within your phone, and then your phone can communicate securely with vendors to buy something online, and they don't have to transfer your credit card information over the internet. So that is a more secure way of having your information securely stored on your device, and your device is able to communicate with other entities online or in the real world and have a transaction go through, but information is not being traded other than check mark, yes, this person has payment information, contact the bank for details, that sort of thing. And just like your phone being able to unlock with biometrics, either a fingerprint or your face, in short, the way that is stored is when an app or a website or Apple Pay or whatever says, I need to scan your face to confirm your identity before moving ahead to unlock whatever it is you're trying to unlock, it doesn't get any information from your device other than yes. It only receives no, the scan didn't go through, block access, or yes, the scan went through, grant access. That's the only information that's transferred. And so you could theoretically have your age verification built into your phone. And then when you come to one of those websites, it'll immediately say, can I scan your face on your phone with on device processing? And the only information transferred is yes, they are above the limited age, or no, they're not above the limited age. However, as I was thinking about all of this, I realized later that I was falling into this common trap. The article says, quote, not everyone has access to an ID or personal device. Many advocates of the digital transition introduce document based verification requirements or device based age verification systems on the assumption that every individual has access to a form of identification or their own smartphone. But this is not true. In the UK, millions of people don't hold a form of identification or own a personal mobile device, instead sharing with family members or using public devices like those at a library or internet cafe. End quote. So that's the trick, is like the things that are the most privacy preserving are going to be only for those most privileged to be able to confirm their identity on their device and have the least amount of information transmitted outside of their device. Whereas people who don't have the right identifications or don't have their own device are going to end up having to use the more risky versions.
Yeah. And, we're talking about, I guess, mainly porn sites at the moment. And we're going to get into some other examples. And so people may be thinking, well, what's the problem? Like that should be locked down or that should be restricted. But this is the kind of thing that does start to build upon itself, because depending on what the current beliefs are in society and the cultural norms, like, yeah, right now it's this, but at what point is it far more? And what gets caught in the net of that? And what ends up being restricted because of political views and not just morality and, hand wringing?
It is already far more widespread than porn sites.
Mhm.
It's anything that could be perceived as violent or it is written in such a way to make people err on the side of I'd better put up an age blocker, because
Right. Just in case.
even if your site is not at all intended to be focused on that, only 1/3 of a website has to contain information or imagery that is perceived to be harmful to children in order to qualify to be required to put up an age barrier. And so a lot of sites that are, you know, message boards, basically, like where people go to have conversations online, are going to have to put up age blockers So
Yeah.
it really is already far beyond pornography.
And that's the kicker right there. That's the whole thing. Recently, someone coming to the country got sent out because he had a meme of JD Vance on his phone. And, now that's silly, haha. But at some point, an authoritarian state will say, well, that's harmful to children. They can use that however they want. And I think occasionally Donald Trump says true things accidentally. And when he talked about Kim Jong Un in his first administration over and over again, talking about how his people stand at attention and his people do this and that and listen to him, that's what this fundamentally is about. It's about control over the population. And been told our whole lives that China is an enemy and the Gulf states are enemies. But really, a lot of our governments just want to be like them. And I think they're enemies because maybe they're jealous of the authoritarian control. And this just seems like a wedge directly into that. It starts with something unobjectionable. Hey, you don't want your kids watching porn. To, you are an enemy of the state for saying that JD Vance has, 7 chins. That's the natural progression of these authoritarian states. They want more and more control. And if this were being done in a full democracy, we might have less problem with it. But clearly, that's not what's happening here. It's not what's happening in the UK. Like the UK has the same issues, similar issues that we have right now. And a lot of people do not feel represented by their governments. And when a government tells you that they're going to limit what you can and cannot see on the internet, and that government is not responsive to you democratically, well, then what will they stop at? And what Jay just described as like a good solution to this, minus the problem of a lot of people not having access to all these things, is the whole problem with our society as it is anyway. Why are there millions of people who do not have access to what is becoming a basic necessity to survive in society? Isn't that what government is supposed to do? Isn't government supposed to keep everyone raising up? And that's not what our government does. That's not what the UK government does. We have widening inequality. And this is another one of those things that shows this giant gap of inequality that we have in this country. There are people who do not have access to what is now a basic thing, an ID, a phone. And that is a problem I would like a government to start addressing more than what you can and cannot watch on the internet.
Yeah, leveling the playing fields.
Speaking as a queer person, I will say that the internet has been foundational in getting information, and I'm an adult, let alone children. And I mean Reddit, these message boards, things like that. It's a lot of exchanges. There's also a lot of like mentorship that happens. Honestly, just gay content in general, no matter what it's being talked about, is currently in a lot of cultures being demonized as explicit, as not appropriate for children. So, of course, when I hear this, I can't help but think how it's going to impact young children. And information does matter. I think back to one of the first gay people I met in college and how it took her so long to realize she was gay because she didn't have the verbiage. Like she knew what a gay man was, and that wasn't her. So that is as far as the thinking could get until she had the word lesbian. Like until she gained that, she could not actualize herself and identify herself. So yeah, this is not great for that.
I'm so glad you brought that up because that is something that this government, the Heritage Foundation run government that we have, has explicitly said that gay content is harmful to children, as if there aren't children who are that. It is demonizing an entire group of people. And they really do think, since this has been discussed, or the way they talk about it, that it's a choice. And if they get rid of access to information about homosexuality, queerness off the internet, well, it just goes away because it's just a choice. And that's what they believe.
Well, and it's under the guise of that gay people, trans people are sexualizing children, or like that's a gateway, right? But in doing so, they're just doing the opposite, which is sexualizing the queer community. Like, everything about my existence doesn't evolve into sex. Like, that's not who I am as a person. That doesn't represent my existence by and large. So I feel like their argument just like really falls apart because they're doing the thing that they're accusing the community of doing, which is sexualizing us.
And I mean, I think about the book bans that have happened all across the country. Like, that's step one, right? Would they prefer for like booksellers online to not be able to sell those books to anyone? Yeah, they totally would prefer that. So this is what they have control over now, but what will lay the groundwork for them to take more control and truly ban in the full sense of the word.
So we read a few articles on this whole topic. Moving on to Tom's Guide, did a disaster waiting to happen? Cybersecurity experts react to UK age verification law. And so they just went and interviewed a whole bunch of experts in online security and got their thoughts. And there was one that really stuck out to me more than the others because they come at it from a much more holistic perspective. They said, I would encourage a broader reflection on the underlying issues, not just age verification itself, but how we balance safety, privacy, and freedom online. That conversation needs to involve more than just technical solutions and enforcement measures, else current and future regulation will cause more harm than good. VPN services exist to protect fundamental rights, especially the right to privacy, the right to freedom of expression, and to the right to access information. These are rights that are increasingly under pressure in the digital age. And based on that person's name, I think they were probably Scandinavian, which makes sense because they sound very Scandinavian in their thoughtful, freedom-loving way. But I mean, that is what we're getting at when we give all the little detailed examples of how the technology works, and Erin can give examples of the importance of information access to a particular community, but it all falls under this umbrella. Obviously, people need safety, privacy, and freedom. Those things are sometimes in tension with each other, but we need to have a better conversation about those things so that we can pursue policies that strike a better balance than this law has so far.
I also just imagine, being a youth in the UK and like facing this and like, is the message of this legislation, oh, wow, my government really cares about me? Like, is that what it feels like? Or does it feel different? And I imagine it probably feels different.
Mhm.
Well, and just a side note on kids hacking the system, one of the most prominent stories is that they figured out how to use not a still image of an adult. You can't use a still image of an adult to scan to get into these sites. But if you have like a slightly moving image of an adult, that seems to work. And so kids have been using the video game person from Death Stranding 2, a a pretty new video game that just came out. And when you like go in to design your character and it just puts the profile up, you can just scan that face to access adult sites. So things are going well.
Norman Reedus
This
just watching all the porn in the UK now.
right. So the final note is whizcase.com just compiled some how to stay safe and deal with this new policy in the UK. So I'll just quickly go through them. Obviously, they recommend using a VPN. For those who don't know, it's a way of masking your computer's identity, your computer or your phone or whatever. It masks its identity by routing it through a secondary computer. It's a VPN server that acts as a secondary computer. So the website sees your web traffic as coming from the VPN. And so it can't know who you are. So use those. They use encrypted data. Make sure you're using a reputable one. And then when you do have to use age verification system, obviously use one of the privacy friendly ones, not one that asks you to upload your ID. You should never upload your ID to anyone on the internet except in like very particular circumstances, usually involving dealing with the government directly. And of course, just avoid sharing personal data directly with any of these types of sites. I mean, this article says avoid sharing it with adult or social sites. I was like, you could expand that list. I would just not share your personal data. In fact, I just want to share quickly a not new thought, but one I've put into practice more recently, which is metaphorically speaking, we've all known that email addresses, that's how you create usernames and accounts all over the internet. And then the best practice is to have unique passwords, right? Shouldn't ever reuse a password. We all know this. If you think it's hard to do that, that means you are not using a password manager. I am evangelical about password managers. Please get yourself a password manager and put it to use. That's what allows you to easily create different passwords for every account you need to log into. However, what I'll say is that data breaches expose both emails and passwords. So the benefit to having a unique password is that that password can't then be used somewhere else, right? That's what they often do with hacks. They hack your Facebook account and get your password, and then they can use that same password to access your Amazon account or whatever, because when people reuse passwords, that's what happens. And so that's the benefit of the unique passwords. But metaphorically speaking, your email address is like your home address and your password is like the key. So you want to make sure people don't have the key to your house. It's so much better if they don't even have your home address. So what I have started doing much more recently is creating unique email addresses for every new account I create. There are platforms that do this. Apple has it built into iCloud, and so that's what I use, but there are third-party sites that do the same thing. And so then if my information is hacked from a database somewhere, not only are they getting a unique password for that site, they're also getting a dummy email address so that my email address can't be associated across accounts. And again, just like we keep saying in these conversations, just because you can't imagine what a hacker might do with your email address doesn't mean they don't know what they're going to do with it. And so I'm a big fan of not just unique passwords, but also dummy email addresses.
And on the point of VPNs, sometimes they can be very expensive. There are free VPNs out there, but they collect a large amount of usage data, which is unfortunate. I will include the link that Tom's Guide put in their article about the best free VPNs in our show notes.
All of us look really defeated in this moment. So I was trying to look for like a hopeful note.
It's just
and
a lot
I
of
don't-
work,
It is.
Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of work to just keep your freaking
we
data protected.
we talked about this. It was probably last year about how it feels like being a middle manager now at
Mhm.
all times.
Yeah,
just
that's Jay's
we're-
revelation. Yeah.
They're constantly just managing this thing and that thing, and now we got a new thing to manage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just the quick summary of that is I realized as Amanda's dad was trying to transfer phone plans from one company to another, I thought about the labor saving devices over the past half century that have saved us from all this labor. That's not untrue, right? But people complain. They're like, oh, I thought all this new technology was supposed to save us from all this labor, but look at all the work I'm doing. And so the revelation I had was, no, it's true. Like a dishwasher does save you from having to wash your dishes by hand. And lots of technology does genuinely save us from having to do labor. However, what we didn't realize is that we just got promoted from laborer to middle manager. And
Yeah.
it turns out that is actually worse in a lot of ways. Like physical labor sucks, but middle management is what really kills your soul. So we didn't realize what we were trading in that case.
Yeah.
So that's why we're trying to get ahead of it now, right? We are trying to be aware of the trade-offs. Don't listen to the UK government or the Trump administration talking about the benefits of their new programs that are in one light convenient and in the other turnkey authoritarianism mechanisms.
I almost interrupted to say, don't listen to the Trump administration, period, the end, stop.
Well, yeah.
Well, sure. I mean, that's a good rule of thumb generally. In fact, let's just have that be the takeaway.
I can't imagine it getting better than that.
Right. I mean, we always like to end on a positive note or we solved a big problem. And today it is don't ever listen to the Trump administration, and that will fix a lot of your issues. All right. If you have any thoughts on how best to manage modernity, send us a note at 202-999-3991. Send an email to j@bestofleft.com or use the encrypted Signal messaging app and reach us at bestofleft.01. Thanks for listening, and remember that this is all really happening, so continue to be decent, act like what you do and say matters, and do what matters most.